Welcome to Beyond Sunday School. Glad you are with us again this week as we put the wraps on the history of Israel's monarchy as we look at the kingdom of Judah. And so this is the southern kingdom. We record this live on Wednesday nights at about 7 o'clock. And so if you would like to be a part of this recording, please send me a message and I will be sure to get you that connection info. And so I've got a few of my friends here online with me. So you may hear some questions during this time. I encourage them to ask questions because if they're thinking them, then you may be as well if you're watching or listening to this a little bit later. So let me pray and then we will get rolling here. Heavenly Father, thanks for tonight. Thank you for some time to gather around the scriptures. And as we do, I pray that we might learn something more about you and that this information might help us to go deeper in the scriptures and in so doing be changed. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Hey, so we're in the southern kingdom, also known as the kingdom of Judah. And so as we learned last week, there were, after Solomon died, there were a couple of guys really vying for his throne, right? And so you had Jeroboam in the north, Rehoboam in the south, and so Rehoboam was the one who thought he was going to take over Solomon's throne and be the king over everybody. But it turns out that he was a bit of an arrogant tool bag and didn't listen to the old guys, but listened only to the young guys. And in so doing, set himself up for failure immediately, where the North said, okay, we're out. We're not going to follow you. We're not going to go with you. We are done. And they put Jeroboam on the throne. And mostly because what they wanted was just some relief from the heavy burdens that Solomon had put on the nation under his reign. Remember, Solomon had done this huge infrastructure building campaign, and to do so he taxed people heavily. He also had conscription labor, so he had basically slave labor, and he wasn't just using people they had conquered or other nations, but he was conscripting people from Israel. And so this is a pretty heavy burden. Basically, under Solomon, we begin to see the real fruition of Samuel's prophecy back in 1 Samuel chapter 8, where God through Samuel said, hey, you guys want a king, it's going to get bad, and it's not going to be what you think it's going to be like. And so even though Solomon was wise and was a very capable and able leader, the people of Israel really experienced some hardship. They really experienced some significant pain and suffering under his leadership. So they wanted some of that rolled back, and basically Rehoboam, based on the advice of his young council, said, nope, I'm going to be even tougher than Solomon. And so the North revolted and followed after Jeroboam. And we looked at their story last week. So you can look back there and catch that story. The North, things did not go so well. Not that they fared much better in the South, but it was a little bit better. So what was the Southern Kingdom? That's kind of the first question that we need to figure out. There were 10 tribes that went with the northern kingdom, and that was nicknamed Israel. probably just because it had the preponderance of tribes, and they were the 10, basically the 10 northern tribes. Now, Judah, this is, even though this is called the Kingdom of Judah or the Southern Kingdom, it was actually comprised of two tribes, Benjamin and Judah. And this was not exactly easy for the Kingdom of Judah under Rehoboam to really get a hold of Benjamin. They had to fight for it. It was a bit of a struggle, but Benjamin, the land of Benjamin, was really important for Judah to get control of, because it provided a buffer between the northern and southern kingdoms, and so this was pretty significant. So you have very early on here, and we catch this story, 1 Kings 12. Somewhere in there, 12:20 or so is where the story really gets rolling, where we see this whole conflict begin to happen between Israel and Judah, between Rehoboam and Jeroboam and all the other Boams. These names are brutal. So right, it really is. It really is. It really is. It's confusing and it's tough. But all that to say, Judah ends up in control. They end up kind of winning Benjamin, and that was important. So the first king, like we said, was Rehoboam, and he ruled for 17 years. He became king when he was 41, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. We catch his story beginning in 1 Kings chapter 14. And his story really begins chapter 14, verse 21. There, he did evil. In verse 22, it says, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. By the sins they committed, they stirred up his jealous anger more than those who were before them had done. So under Rehoboam's leadership, Judah goes off the rails. Verse 23, it says, they also set up for themselves high places, sacred stones, and Asherah poles on every hill and under every spreading tree. There were even male shrine prostitutes in the land. The people engaged in all the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. So under Rehoboam, what happens is that they basically go backwards. They see a reversion in their faith from the monotheistic, God-centered faith of Moses, of Joshua, of those who the Lord brought into the promised land. They reverted back to the tribal deities, the pagan worship, the polytheistic worship of those who God had driven out of the land. So the issue here, again, just like in Israel, is this downfall of proper and right worship. They had lost their way in the faith. And so when you start reading through the prophets, the writing prophets who are calling out the nations of Israel and Judah, who are warning them of exile, they are pointing to these issues, to these spiritual issues. So many times in American Christianity, especially, we have this image of the Old Testament being this law-driven, rule-driven, legalism kind of thing, that worshiping God was about following rules and doing the right things. But that's not really what was going on here. As we read through the prophets, as we read through the history and the story of the people of Israel and Judah, the central issue at stake is their relationship with God and how they were being faithful or unfaithful. And it all comes back to idolatry. It all comes back to whether or not they are worshiping the God of the Bible, or if they are worshiping some other God that has been created by man. And so, this this is, it starts off bad. It starts off bad in Judah, and it starts off bad in Israel. And so Rehoboam, he was no treat. You can read, more of his story there throughout verse 31. You can also check out Second Chronicles 10 through 12. But really, we're just kind of going backwards to that time of the judges, and even before that, into simple Canaanite worship. Now, one of the things that we do learn about Rehoboam is that he had some military success against Jeroboam, right? First Kings, they were in constant conflict. Rehoboam and Jeroboam, they were not necessarily in open warfare, but there was kind of just this warm war that was constantly going. And we catch this in verse 30, right, of chapter 14. It says, there was continual warfare between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And so what was this, what was this warfare like? It wasn't full-blown war. It was probably border skirmishes, those kinds of things, as they were trying to gain, as the two kings were trying to gain control of the Benjamin area as a buffer zone. So they were kind of working there. First Kings 14:25 through 27, we learn that Shishak of Egypt, beats him, takes old Rehoboam down. Verse 25, it says, in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, attacked Jerusalem. He carried off the treasures of the temple of the Lord and the treasures of the royal palace. He took everything, including all the gold shields Solomon had made. So King Rehoboam made bronze shields to replace them and assigned these to the commanders of the guard on duty at the entrance to the royal palace. So there was this, he was looted, he was raided. Egypt comes back with a vengeance, right? So you can see this trajectory of reversion, right? Do you catch the storytelling here, right? They fall backwards in their religion, in their faith, to a pre-taking the promised land. And then what's the first thing that happens? Egypt comes and loots them and takes everything out, all the things of value out of Jerusalem. Do you see how these storytellers are pulling this whole thing together? It's pretty cool when you think about just kind of the story arc. These guys were good writers. They told great narratives, because if this is our story, right? They're saying, what got us out of Egypt? What happened? What happened in Egypt? Well, the Israelites, they served their God. They worshiped their God. There was this desire to go to the wilderness and worship. Pharaoh wouldn't let them. So what does God do? God sets the whole thing up for them as slaves to get freed. And as they do, they loot Egypt without warfare. And so that the whole story then of them, worshiping at the mountain and worshiping in the wilderness and learning the tabernacle, the whole thing. And now here you have in this, this new king of Judah, a reversion back, and everything kind of goes backwards. So now there's some questions about how did this whole thing go down with Shishak? Because in his annals, in the annals of Egypt that we have, Jerusalem is not listed in one of the cities that he took. So that's a pretty significant question. Why Why does he not list Jerusalem? Why does he not list central Judah? He lists southern Judah, cities down there. And so it's really only here in the Old Testament that we get this the story of Shishak taking all the valuables. And so what scholars think happened is that Rehoboam cut a deal. That Rehoboam said, whoa, 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 how about this? I will give you all these things and you leave central Judah alone. You don't come any further north. And so they think this is what happened, because we in Second Chronicles 12:6-7, we have God proclaiming through a prophet that God would deliver them. And so central Judah not being taken by Egypt shows very much a deliverance by God. And how was this brought about? Well, this was brought about by the deal, by the ability to just kind of pay off Egypt. And so, I think as we look at the story, something that we need to recognize is that sometimes God works in different ways than maybe we would think, right? We would maybe want God to wipe Shishak out or beat him in military battle, but God used these other means. And Shishak was active in the north, according to his notes. There are numerous cities listed from northern from Israel itself. So this was a powerful guy, and Rehoboam was able to avoid being completely taken down by him, and this was evidence of God's grace and how he was able to deliver Judah to kind of keep rolling. So his successor is Abijam, and he was a faithless king as well. You can read his story in 1 Kings 15:1-8, and there's just not much there. The next big king is Asa, and his story is told in 1 Kings 15:9-24 and 2 Chronicles 14-16. And what makes Asa so unique is he is the first king after Solomon to be considered religiously good, right? So in First Kings 15, chapter 15, verse 9 says, in the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Asa became king of Judah, and he reigned in Jerusalem 41 years. His grandmother's name was Maacah, daughter of Abishalom. Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done. He expelled the male shrine prostitutes from the land and got rid of all the idols his ancestors had made. He even deposed his grandmother Maacah from her position as queen mother because she had made a repulsive image for the worship of Asherah. Asa cut it down and burned it in the Kidron Valley. Although he did not remove the high places, Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life. He brought into the temple of the Lord the silver and gold and articles that he and his father had dedicated. So, Asa does good, and he hangs in. He hangs in as a pretty good king. He didn't do everything that maybe he should have done. He didn't wipe out the high places and those kinds of things. But he, the scriptures say he remained committed to the Lord his whole life. Now, remember, the northern kingdom of Israel had 19 kings, and not one of them did right in the eyes of the Lord. Judah also has 19 kings. 8 of Judah's kings are said to have been good in God's sight. So there is this significant difference between Israel and Judah. And that difference, that change really happens here with Asa. And you have to wonder, right? Was this change due to the result of the temple being in Jerusalem, staring them in the face, these kings, every day? What was it that changed the course of of Judah as opposed to Israel? And that's a question I don't know if we can really answer, but we can know from history that because Judah's leaders, about half were good, they followed the Lord, their hearts were committed to the Lord. Judah lasted, about 140 years longer as a nation than did Israel, and so there was a bit of staying power. Why? Because their hearts, some of them had hearts that were faithful to the Lord. So Asa was a good king. And what do we find out about him? What are some things that he does? Well, he replaces, he puts these gold and silver things back into the temple. He takes down the foreign gods, tears down the Asherah pole, even denounces his grandmother. And but in 2 Chronicles 14, 9 through 15, the other thing he does is he beats back Egypt. He is able to take down Egypt. And this is a big deal. And what we learn here in 2 Chronicles 14, 9 through 15 is that Asa looked to God for assistance and received it, which enabled him to defeat the larger force and take spoil for Israel. So this was a big moment, right? This is, again, the storytelling arc, right? Rehoboam comes in, Egypt wins. We have this reversion back. Now you have it. Yeah, go ahead.
What chapter was that in Second Chronicles?
2 Chronicles 14, 9 through 15.
Oh, thank you.
Yep. So, so you have in the storytelling here, follow the arc, right? Follow the narrative arc that we have going. Rehoboam, faithless, bad king, brings in the Canaanite religion. Egypt wins, takes all the stuff out of the temple. Faithful king, follows God, puts stuff back in the temple, beats Egypt in war, drives them out. Why? Because he was able to trust. He trusted the Lord, and the Lord drove them out and defeated them. This is a pretty big moment. Now, we learn in 1 Kings 15, 16 through 22 that not everything was perfect. It says here there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, throughout their reigns. Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and fortified Ramah to prevent anyone from leaving or entering the territory of Asa, king of Judah. So they have this, kind of this battle going. It was not great all the time. So what we found out though is that he ends up getting a bit, I don't know the way to put it. He gets a little arrogant. He gets a little self-confident, and he starts kind of making some deals and doing some different things, and so he ends up kind of cutting his nose off despite his face against Hanani, or when Hanani the prophet kind of calls him out on this, and we catch that story in 2 Chronicles 16. So he cuts deals with these other nations. He cuts deals with Ben-Hadad of Damascus, and just gets himself in a position where he's kind of under the thumb. He owes somebody, and Hanani basically says, "Dude, you should have trusted God. You should have trusted God with this. You didn't need to cut a deal with another nation. And so, you know, it's this will kind of haunt Judah for a while. Now, uh, now we move into a period of alliance with Israel. If you remember last week, we talked about Omri. He was probably one of the most capable kings in Israel in the north, and it's at this time following Asa's reign that we begin to see this overlap between the house of Omri and the house of this house of Asa. So we have peace between the two countries, and there really wasn't anything good going religiously in Israel. Remember, Omri and Ahab were the two kings back to back that were pretty much the standard bearers for religious evil and opulence and injustice and all kinds of other things, but they were both very capable kings. At this time, you have the next king is Jehoshaphat, who is Asa's son. He rules for 35 years. If you notice, there is a significant difference in the length of reigns between Israeli kings and the Jewish kings. These guys reigned for the most part for a long, long time. We catch up with Jehoshaphat here in 1 Kings 22, verses 41 through 50. So 1 Kings 22, verses 41 through 50. It says, Jehoshaphat, son of Asa, became king of Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 25 years. His mother's name was Azubah, daughter of Shili. In everything, he followed the ways of his father Asa and did not stray from them. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. The high places, however, were not removed, and the people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. Jehoshaphat was also at peace with the king of Israel. So he's commended. He's commended for staying faithful. But he still didn't take down the high places. So we catch a story in 2 Chronicles 20, verses 1 through 30, where we get a sense of Jehoshaphat's faith. Moab, there is a coalition of Moab, Ammon, and Edom, and they are getting ready to invade. And when he learns of this, what he does is he calls for a time of fasting and prayer in Jerusalem. And so God responds to the prayer voiced by the king himself through an attendant prophet, and promises victory. So when this is crazy, when Jehoshaphat's troops, led by singing Levites, came to where that coalition was located, those three armies had broken out into open conflict with one another. So they because the three of them, Moab, Ammon, and Edom, they didn't like each other at all, and so they end up fighting with one another. And so when Judah, when the armies of Judah, when the armies of the southern kingdom show up, all they have to do is just collect the booty from the war. They just have to loot it because everybody's already dead. They took each other out. So he was a faithful guy. In 2 Chronicles 17, 10 through 19, we learn that he developed a very strong army consisting of 5 divisions, 3 from Judah and 2 from Benjamin. And so this is a guy who did pretty well. He's a pretty able leader. He also took some significant steps to improve the judicial procedures in the land. And he realized that the Mosaic law was not being followed in civil matters, and so he appoints judges in the key cities in the kingdom to make more local courts. And this would have fit way better with what we learn in Deuteronomy about how all of that was supposed to work within the nation. The other thing he did is he appointed Levites and significant leaders to serve in a central court in Jerusalem. And so, this was important. He kind of made things better. So he did a good job with the judicial stuff. He also did a good job of keeping peace with the house of Omri under Ahab. He worked with him. And so, at this time, while Jehoshaphat, was leading, he did a pretty good job of this, of really being a statesman. Now, one of the problems that he gets himself into through his statesmanship is he marries his son off to Ahab and Jezebel's daughter, Athaliah, which will come back to haunt Judah in a big way, and we will get there soon. But during Jehoshaphat's reign, you had Micaiah, who was a prophet. You had Eleazar, who was a prophet, and Elisha was also prophesying during his reign. So, he so as he's excuse me. All right. As he's wrapping up his reign, he names his son Jehoram as a co-regent with him, which this is pretty normal for the kings of Judah. Even Jehoshaphat was co-regent with his father Asa, near the end of Asa's life. So this is something that was super normal. Now we catch Jehoram's story starting up here in 2 Kings 8, and it picks up like this, starting in verse 16. It says, in the 5th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, when Jehoshaphat was king of Judah, Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, began his reign as king of Judah. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Nevertheless, for the sake of his servant David, the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah. He had promised to maintain a lamp for David and his descendants. In the time of Jehoram, Edom rebelled against Judah and set up its own king. So, Jehoram was a bad dude, not great, and he was, and it was rooted in this marriage he had with Athaliah. This is a pretty significant thing. So there were some pretty unhappy things, bad things that happened during his reign. The first was the fact that he slaughtered his 6 brothers. And, we catch that story in 2 Chronicles chapter 21. So, probably why Jehoram did it was to ensure his own rule against their rivals. They were his rivals. And so this was pretty normal activity for that time. That's what you did. If you got named king, you killed all your brothers to make sure none of them would, challenge you for the throne. This is not the way that God would want things to work out. And you have to wonder, why did he do this? Why was he so different from his dad? Probably because of his wife, probably because of Athaliah. And we'll catch her story here in a minute. So the second and third bad events that took place was there was, two revolts against his rule. One was by the country of Edom. Catch that in 2 Kings 8:20 through 22. And even though they had helped his dad, uh, you know, against Moab, they were like, nope, we're not down. We are not down with Jehoram. He's a bad guy. And so he had another revolt, which was by a city, Libnah. We get that story in 2 Kings 8:22. You know, and it was probably, the assumption is that it was a successful revolt because there's no evidence in the scriptures in the story given that Jehoram even tried to retaliate or try to get back. The fourth problem in his reign, there was an invasion of his country of Judah by the Philistines and the Arabians, and Judah just got smoked. We learn in 2 Chronicles 21:16 through 17 that material goods were seized, and all of Jehoram's own wives and sons, with the exception of one, were captured. So that's just, for a king to have your whole family and all your stuff taken by raiding, to have it all looted, including your family, super humiliating. So it was not going well for him. Then the fifth bad thing was how he died. He died of a disease of the intestines, and this was in fulfillment of a warning given by Elijah. And so we hear that story in 2 Chronicles chapter 21, beginning in verse 12. And so Jehoram's reign, it was bad politically, it was bad militarily, and it was bad religiously. It was just not good. He followed in Ahab. Now, his one son, who didn't get captured, he succeeds. His father's name is Ahaziah, and he only lasts for a year, and so he ends up getting killed by Jehu's men. And finally, he dies in Megiddo, and we catch that story. You can kind of look up, you can read his story there in 2 Kings 8:25 through 29, and then 9:27 through 29. So what happens after him? Well, Athaliah takes over, right? Jehoram's wife, the daughter of Jezebel, she becomes the queen. And so what does she do? Well, we catch her story in 2 Kings 11, 1 through 16. Her story is so not good. It says, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to destroy the whole royal family. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram and sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the royal princes who were about to be murdered. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom to hide him from Athaliah, so he was not killed. He remained hidden with his nurse at the temple of the Lord for 6 years, while Athaliah ruled in the land. Now, does that story sound familiar at all? Sounds a little Moses-ish, doesn't it? So she, but what does Athaliah do? She kills all of her grandsons, all of her grandchildren. She wipes them out. She was a pretty awful person, and she reigns. She reigned for a while, and it was problematic. She reigned for 6 years while they were waiting for Joash to grow up, and We just know that uh, the Baal worship rose. It was perpetuated by her, and so Joash, when Joash takes takes office, it is, they're not in a good place. So what happens? Well, Joash takes office. We catch his story here in 2 Kings chapter 12. He rules 40 years, and he is helped, advised, cared for by the high priest Jehoiada, or Jehoiada, however you want to pronounce it. And you kind of have to give. I mean, when Joash, when Joash becomes king, he's 7 years old, and he begins this run of good kings. So you have these four kings that are going to roll through here that are good. So you have Joash, and he does good stuff. He has significant religious reformation that we learn about in 2 Kings 12, 2 through 16. And he does a lot here. So let's just take a quick look at it. In the 7th year of Jehu, Joash becomes king. His mother's name was Zibiah. She was from Beersheba. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years Jehoiada the priest instructed him. The high places, however, were not removed. The people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. But Joash said to the priests, "Collect all the money that is brought as sacred offerings to the temple of the Lord, the money collected in the census, the money received from personal vows, and the money brought voluntarily to the temple. Let every priest receive the money from one of the treasurers, and then use it to repair whatever damage is found in the temple." But by the 23rd year of King Joash, the priests still had not repaired the temple. Therefore, Joash summoned Jehoiada the priest and the other priests and asked them, "Why aren't you repairing the damage done to the temple? Take no more money from your treasurers, but hand it over for repairing the temple." The priests agreed that they would not collect any more money from the people and that they would not repair the temple themselves. So Jehoiada the priest took a chest and bored a hole in its lid. He placed it beside the altar on the right side as one enters the temple of the Lord. The priests who guarded the entrance put into the chest all the money that was brought into the temple of the Lord. Whenever they saw that there was a large amount in the chest, the royal secretary and the high priest came, counted the money that had been brought into the temple of the Lord, and put it into bags. When the amount had been determined, they gave the money to the men appointed to supervise the work of the temple. With it, they paid those who worked on the temple of the Lord, the carpenters and builders, the masons and stonecutters. They purchased timber and blocks of wood and blocks of dressed stone for the repair of the temple, and met all the other expenses restoring the temple. The money brought into the temple was not spent for making silver basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, and all the rest. It was paid to the workers who used it to repair the temple. I mean, he does this. He just does. This is just good stuff. And he does a great job of bringing people together to rebuild the temple and to kind of get it going again. Now, he runs into some problems because eventually Jehoiada dies at the age of 130, which was near the end of Joash's reign. And when he dies, the king becomes listening to it. He starts listening to advisors who were Baalists. They were following Baal, and so he was so influenced by them that we learn in 2 Chronicles 24, verses 20 through 22, that he has Jehoiada's son Zechariah stoned to death for rebuking him for his sinful actions. So this is problematic. So he starts off strong, but but he just doesn't end well. At the end, he ends up being assassinated by conspirators who take him out. So this was probably due to their disapproval of his many reversals in policy. After Jehoiada dies. So then we catch Amaziah. He ruled 29 years. The last 24 were in co-regent. They were co-regent with his son Uzziah. He was approved by God, but did not remove all the high places. And so he just kind of rolls through. Uzziah, we catch something about Uzziah in the opening of Isaiah's call, right? In the year of King Uzziah's death, right? This was so Uzziah was a pretty big time king. He ruled longer than any prior king of Judah or Israel. He reigned for 52 years. And the first 24 were in co-regency with his father, and then the last 12 were served with his son Jotham. So his reign, Uzziah's reign, is marked very much by this overlapping, this overlapping co-regency. So Uzziah, he was a pretty good king. He did very well, but he runs into a problem, and the reason why his son needed to be a co-regent with him is that he ends up. We learn in 2 Chronicles chapter 26, verses 16 through 22, that he tried to fulfill the role of a priest. He tried to offer incense in the temple, and he had been warned against doing it by 81 priests. But then his punishment was to have leprosy of the feet. And so, then it's at that point that Jotham, his son, takes over. Now, under Uzziah, they expand their kingdom toward the south. He's able to maintain control over Edom and some of these other places. He's able to take back several cities from the Philistines, including Gath. So Uzziah was strengthening their home base, but he was also, taking greater control of the land again. And so at the end of Jeroboam II's reign in Israel, so around 743 BC, you have Uzziah really kind of reaching his zenith point. He'd become quite successful, quite well known, and he even is named the leader of a coalition of armies that go to war against Assyria to fight off Tiglath-Pileser. And even in Tiglath-Pileser's own records, it says that the coalition that he fought against was led by Azriahu of Yahudi, which everyone, scholars are certain means Uzziah of Judah. So he was probably around 64 years old when he led this coalition. It was quite an honor, but he was the dude by the time the end of his life came around. So his son Jotham, who co-reigned with him, he reigned for 20 years. The first 12 were as a co-regent with his dad. Jotham in turn installed his son Ahaz, as his co-regent. And so when you do all the math and the dating and all that kind of stuff, correlations show that this was done about 12 years before Jotham died. which means surprisingly that these co-regencies were overlapping. That is, Jotham made his son Ahaz his co-regent while he was still co-regent with his father Uzziah. So there's a period of 4 years where Judah had Uzziah as the chief ruler, Jotham as his co-regent, and Ahaz as Jotham's co-regent. It was kind of this, almost like this, I don't know, farm system of kings. Basically, they kind of had rolling. So, under, Jotham was a good king. He was good, and he kept the country in a strong position. They only had one military engagement mentioned in the scriptures, but he was, he did a lot of building. He did a lot of infrastructure and construction, and so they had a very high level of prosperity. Now, under Jotham, things begin to slowly go sideways religiously, because oftentimes what happens in times of prosperity is the religious aspect of our lives gets neglected. Why? Because we don't think we need God anymore. Mm-hmm. And so we begin to see some of that happen. His son Ahaz rises to power in 2 Kings chapter 16. It says, in the 17th year of Pekah, son of Remaliah, Ahaz, son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord his God. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel, and even sacrificed his son in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places and the hilltops and under every spreading tree. So Ahaz, bad guy, sacrificed his own kid. So it's problematic. And so what do you think you would expect to see happen under Ahaz if he's not following God faithfully? Well, you have military reverses, right? He starts losing battles. They come under significant pressure. There is judgment coming through these other nations, and specifically through Assyria. And if you remember, as you start reading, through the prophets, this was under Isaiah. Isaiah was the significant prophet at this time, and he's warning the nation of the coming possibility of exile. Now, Israel doesn't listen, and they end up falling shortly, right at about this time. Remember, they fall in 722, and his reign ends in 728, and we see Hezekiah's reign pick up in 728. So it's right in here that the Assyrians come to play and really become problematic. Now, Hezekiah succeeds his father Ahaz, and Hezekiah is a good king. He was co-regent with Ahaz for 13 years. He reigned for 42 years. We catch his story in 2 Kings 18 through 20. And it says that in verse 3, it says, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, cut down the Asherah poles. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made, for up to that time the Israelites had been burning incense to it. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was none like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. He held fast to the Lord and did not stop following him. He kept the commands the Lord had given Moses, and the Lord was with him. He was successful in whatever he undertook. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him. From watchtower to fortified city, he defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory. I mean, Hezekiah was the dude. He really was kind of the important guy, and he fights off Sennacherib and in the Assyrians. We catch that story in Second Chronicles 32, 1-8. And then again, in more, the story continues into 32, Second Chronicles 32, 9-21. It's during this time that he constructs, one of the most important things. He makes what is called the Siloam Tunnel, which you can still walk through to this day. It is a tunnel from the spring of Gihon through the hill of Ophel to a place within Jerusalem lower than the starting point. It is an unbelievable piece of engineering. And I've walked it. It's crazy. It's unbelievable. And what we understand is that, we understand that there were workers working from both ends, and they met in the middle, and you can see a little tiny jog where the two sides meet, but it's not that far off. It's not much of a jog at all. It's absolutely insane, the kind of skill that it took to build this, to be able to get the water, which allowed Jerusalem to withstand sieges, and in particular, the siege from the Assyrians. It's approximately 1,777 feet. And it's just an absolutely amazing thing. To be able to see it today is really crazy, to think that it was, built here, somewhere around, 690 BC. It's a crazy thing. Hezekiah he was a very good king. He did a lot of good stuff. He ends up catching an illness, and he asks God to heal him. God does, says you get 15 more years. Shows it with the sundial, right, moving back 10 degrees, that whole thing. Now, one of the things that Hezekiah does do and gets rebuked by Isaiah over is when the upstart nation of Babylon comes calling to pay him tribute. And what does Hezekiah do? He shows them all the riches and glories of Judah. And what does Isaiah tell him? He says, someday they're going to come back and they will take everything you have shown them. And that's what happens in 586 BC. So things begin to go downhill from here. In 2 Kings 21, we get Manasseh. He was 12 years old when he became king. He reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out. He rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He also erected altars to Baal and made an Asherah pole, as Ahab, king of Israel, had done. He bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshipped them. He built altars in the temple of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem, I will put my name. In the two courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to all the starry hosts. He sacrificed his own son in the fire, practiced divination, sought omens, consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing his anger. He was a bad guy. Things went super south. And we start the march towards, the march towards exile. So bad guy Manasseh. You can read about all his badness in 2 Kings chapter 21 and 2 Chronicles 33. His son Ammon, also bad guy. Really pretty horrible dude too. Um, and so then we get this last good king, Josiah. Uh, he's the last good king. At the age of 26, well, we get his story. Um, he reigns for about 30 years. We catch his story in 2 Kings 22 through chapter 23 and 2 Chronicles 34 through 35. He in his reign, he brings about significant reformation. The law of the Lord, the book of the law of the Lord, through Moses had been lost, and so we learn in 2 Chronicles 34 through 34:14 that as he's recovering that, he asks Hilkiah to start reading it. Josiah brings back the celebration of the Passover. I mean, he was a good king, and he did well. So the reforms that he brought were significant. But as he's doing this, Babylon is on the rise. So while Babylon is rising to power, you have the writing prophets in Josiah's life that kind of cover the next little bit of time here in the 7th century, and probably why they had such sweeping religious changes were the power and impact of these prophets, right? So during Josiah's reign, you had Jeremiah writing, you had Zephaniah writing, you had Nahum writing, you have Habakkuk writing. So I mean, this was a powerful time religiously with good prophets. Jehoaz is the next king. He was a failure. He was taken prisoner to Egypt. You catch the storyline there, going back to Egypt now. Jehoiakim takes over for his brother, Jehoaz. And all throughout this time, Babylon is rising to power. Nebuchadnezzar comes to power now, and it's under it's during this reign of Jehoiachin, the next king, that Babylon makes it pretty clear that it's coming. In 586, they fall. Jerusalem falls and goes into captivity under Zedekiah, who was kind of put there by Nebuchadnezzar. So, it falls, and that's really the end. After that time, you have no other time again will the nation of Israel look and hold the kind of influence and power it did before 586. So it comes in and we see this wiping out of Judah, including the complete destruction of the temple built by Solomon, which had stood for 4 centuries. And and the impact of that temple is still celebrated in synagogues today. There's something called the Lachish letters. These are 21 little letters dating from around this time, and they were found in the gate of Lachish, and it's some military correspondence with the governor of that city. And it says, in what they described, was there was significant devastation that was experienced all through Judah. In one letter, an officer stationed at an observation post writes to the Lachish commander that the signal of Azekah can no longer be seen, which suggests that this city had just fallen to the Babylonian forces. Jeremiah indicates that Azekah and Lachish were two of the last cities to remain before the fearful onslaught. The Babylonian monarch intended that Judah should never again revolt. So that is how the monarchy of Israel in Judah comes to its crushing conclusion under the heel of Babylon. You can read about the return in Ezra and Nehemiah, and but moving forward, what we are. Well, I guess before I go there, do you guys have any questions?
I have a question about Israel today.
Mm-hmm.
How religious are they today as far as,
So-
following God's rules and
Yeah. So, modern day Israel is probably very similar to Israel from the past. You go there, there are Orthodox Jews who are seeking to follow Torah to the letter. Jews that are following, these Orthodox Jews are following the way that the Pharisees probably sought to live in Jesus's time, connecting all the way back to there. You have, Jews modern day Jews who are, they try to do good. They try to stay kosher. They try to follow most of the rules, that kind of thing. They try to do that, but they're pretty modern in a lot of ways. And then you have just, ethnic Jews who are secular as you can get. So you have people of really all three kind of stripes and everywhere in between. But this is also why, if you you go to Israel today and you see the Western Wall, which is commonly referred to as the Wailing Wall, that is as close as the Jewish people can get to the original site of Solomon's temple. Is that wall, which is why it is a holy place for them, because you have the the mosque on the Temple Mount now, and so the Jewish people cannot go there, so it's still there. If you talk to Orthodox Jewish people, and even really religiously faithful Jewish people, they'll tell you that they still feel as though they are in exile, that they truly have not returned home, because the temple has not been restored to Jerusalem. So there's still many very faithful Jewish people. There's a growing number of Messianic Jewish people who are following Jesus as Messiah. So it's, things continue as they have been really for the last couple thousand years. Any other questions? All right. Well, where we're going to go next is we are going to spend some time looking at the historical, cultural contexts for New Testament letters and books. So we'll look at, things like, hey, where do the Gospels, when were they written? Who are they written to? What are their audiences? How do they, especially the Gospels, how do they interconnect with one another? That kind of thing. So we're going to kind of look at some of that story and some of that background information over the next number of weeks here on Beyond Sunday School. So again, we record this live on Wednesday nights at 7:00. And if you would like to be a part of this time and ask questions, please send me a message, drose@acts13.net, and I will make sure that you get added to the Zoom call. And you can you can ask your questions and be a part of this conversation. So thanks for coming and being with us. And we'll see you next week on Beyond Sunday School.